"Marry me, and I'll help you raise your daughters," the millionaire woman said to the single dad. His reply shocked her. Rain hammered against the coffee shop window as Jim Patterson stared at his phone screen, watching
Please,
his
we need
bank
to talk
balance
about
drop
this.
below
It's important for the
$200.
girls.
Again. His weathered hands, calloused from years of construction work before the accident, trembled slightly as he calculated how many days he could stretch what remained. 3 weeks until his disability check arrived, and groceries for 2 growing girls didn't come cheap. The worn linoleum beneath his boots had seen better days, much like the faded Seahawks jacket hanging loose on his frame, 30 pounds lighter than before the Morrison site incident had crushed 2 vertebrae and ended his career as a foreman. 8 months of rejection letters and humiliating interviews where potential employers' eyes glazed over the moment they noticed his careful movements, the way he couldn't quite stand fully straight anymore. "Daddy, can we get the chocolate muffin?" 8-year-old Sophie pressed her nose against the display case, breath fogging the glass. Beside her, 6-year-old Maya tugged at his jacket sleeve, pointing at the colorful pastries with the wonder only children possessed. Their second-hand dresses, too short now, growing faster than he could afford to replace them, made his throat tighten. Jim's heart clenched. They'd been surviving on generic cereal and peanut butter sandwiches for days. The kind of meals that filled stomachs without nourishing bodies, the kind that made Sophie's cheekbones more pronounced each morning, made Maya's eyes seem too large for her thinning face. "Maybe next time, sweetheart." The lie tasted bitter on his tongue. How many times had he said those exact words this month, 10/20? Sophie's hopeful expression dimmed, replaced by the careful blankness of a child learning not to ask for things. That look destroyed him more than any physical pain his ruined back could generate. "Sir," a crisp professional voice cut through his internal struggle. Jim looked up to find an elegant woman in an expensive charcoal suit standing beside their table. Her silver hair was styled with the kind of precision that screamed executive boardroom, and her blue eyes held an intensity that made him straighten instinctively, despite the spike of pain it sent through his spine. She looked about 60, maybe 65, but carried herself with the confidence of someone who'd spent decades making people listen when she spoke. The Patek Philippe watch on her wrist probably cost more than Jim had earned in his best year. Her Hermes Birkin bag, he only knew the brand because his late wife Rachel had once jokingly pointed one out in a magazine, sat perfectly positioned against her hip. "I'm Catherine Sterling. I couldn't help but notice you and your daughters." Jim's protective instincts flared hot and immediate. Every news story about trafficking, every warning about strangers, every father's nightmare flooded his system with adrenaline that overrode his exhaustion. "Look, lady, I don't know who you are, but we're fine. We don't need anything." He pulled the girls closer. Sophie's thin shoulder pressing against his ribs, Maya's small hand finding his. The woman, Catherine Sterling, whoever the hell that was, didn't flinch at his tone. Didn't offer the patronizing smile he'd come to expect from do-gooders who thought poverty was a problem solved by handouts and condescension. "I don't mean to intrude. I'm actually here because of you, Mr. Patterson. I've been looking for you." The coffee shop suddenly felt too small, the air too thick. Looking for him, Jim's mind raced through possibilities. Debt collectors didn't wear $1,000 suits, and process servers didn't approach families in coffee shops. His landlord had threatened eviction, but this woman didn't fit that picture either. "You're James Patterson, 34 years old, former construction foreman. 2 daughters, Sophie and Maya. You've been out of work 8 months since the Morrison site accident." Catherine's voice was matter-of-fact, clinical, even, but not cruel. She recited his life like reading from a dossier, and the hair on the back of Jim's neck stood up because that's exactly what this felt like. Someone who'd done their homework. "You're 3 months behind on rent, and you've been selling your belongings to keep food on the table." Jim's face flushed with embarrassment and anger, heat crawling up his neck. The businessman at the corner table glanced up from his laptop, clearly eavesdropping, and Catherine fixed him with a stare that could have frozen fire. He quickly returned to his screen. "How the hell do you know that?" His voice came out rougher than intended, edged with the kind of desperation he'd been trying to hide from his daughters. Sophie and Maya were listening with wide eyes, picking up on the adult tension swirling above their heads, even if they couldn't fully understand it. Catherine glanced at the girls, then back at Jim, and something shifted in her expression. The corporate steel softened just slightly, revealing something more human underneath. "Because I make it my business to know about people who matter. And Mr. Patterson, you matter very much indeed." She reached into her briefcase, Italian leather, probably custom, and withdrew a tablet showing him a photograph that made his blood freeze in his veins. The image arrowed straight through his chest, bypassing his conscious mind and hitting something deeper, older, buried under years of trying to forget. It was him, 20 years younger, in military fatigue, standing beside a burning vehicle in Afghanistan. Beside him stood a young woman soldier, her face partially obscured by smoke and flame, but he recognized her instantly. Would recognize her in his nightmares for the rest of his life. Operation Enduring Freedom, 2019. Forward Operating Base Chapman. Catherine's voice dropped lower, and Jim realized her hands were shaking slightly as she held the tablet. Whatever this was about, it mattered to her on a level that went beyond business, beyond curiosity. "You saved my daughter's life that day, Mr. Patterson." The tablet slipped from Jim's nerveless fingers, clattering onto the wooden table. His mind reeled back to that scorching day in Afghanistan, the IED explosion that had turned a routine patrol into hell on Earth. The screaming metal, the acrid smell of burning fuel, and something worse, melting plastic, scorched flesh. The young soldier trapped beneath the burning Humvee, her legs pinned, ammunition cooking off in the vehicle like the world's deadliest popcorn. He remembered pulling her free, his hands blistering from the superheated metal, the smell of diesel fuel choking his lungs as he dragged her clear. Then going back for Thompson, then Rodriguez, while rounds zinged past his head and the heat from the flames felt like standing too close to the sun. "Amanda Morrison." The name emerged as barely a whisper dragged up from a place he'd locked away. Jim rarely talked about his deployment, about the things he'd seen and done. Rachel had known not to ask, had understood that some doors needed to stay closed. Is she alive?" Catherine's composure cracked for just a moment, revealing raw emotion beneath her polished exterior. Grief, pride, love loss, all of it flickering across her face before she regained control. "Thanks to you, she made it home. She had a beautiful life, got married, started a family." The past tense registered before Catherine spoke her next words, and Jim felt his stomach drop. "She died 3 years ago in a car accident. But she lived because of what you did that day." The walls of the coffee shop seemed to close in around him. Sophie and Maya sat silent now, sensing the weight of the adult conversation swirling above their heads, understanding on some instinctive level that something important was happening, even if the details escaped them. "I'm sorry for your loss." The words felt inadequate, hollow. What do you say to someone whose daughter you saved only to have her die anyway? What comfort could possibly exist in that equation? "But I still don't understand why you're here." Catherine leaned forward, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper, intimate despite the public setting. "Before Amanda died, she made me promise something. She said if anything happened to her, I should find James Patterson, the man who gave her the chance to live. She wanted me to make sure he was taken care of the way he took care of her." Jim's throat tightened. A dying woman's wish spoken 3 years ago had led this elegant stranger to a rundown coffee shop in Seattle where a broken construction worker counted pennies and lied to his daughters about chocolate muffins. "I don't understand. You're her mother. I'm her stepmother, but I raised her from the time she was 12. Amanda was everything to me." Catherine's eyes glistened with unshed tears, but her voice remained steady. This was a woman accustomed to maintaining control even when emotions threatened to overwhelm her. When she passed, I lost my only child, but she left me with a mission, and Catherine Sterling always completes her missions. The businessman in the corner looked up again from his laptop, curiosity winning over discretion. Catherine noticed, and her gaze could have stripped paint. He hunched back over his screen immediately. Jim rubbed his forehead, overwhelmed by the surreal quality of this conversation. A woman from his past, killed in action in his memory but alive for 20 more years, thanks to a split-second decision he'd made without thinking. A daughter he'd saved who'd grown up, fallen in love, built a life, and then lost it all to random chance and drunk drivers. Amanda told me about that day, about how you didn't hesitate, didn't think about your own safety. She said you pulled her out and then went back for 2 others while the ammunition was cooking off in that vehicle. Catherine's words painted a picture of heroism, but Jim only remembered terror and adrenaline and the certain knowledge that if he didn't move right, then people were going to die. That's what any soldier would have done. No, Mr. Patterson. That's what a hero does. And heroes shouldn't be sitting in coffee shops counting change while their children go hungry. The blunt assessment hit harder than any insult could have. Jim felt the familiar shame rising, the same feeling that came when Sophie asked why they couldn't afford new shoes, when Maya's teacher gently mentioned that the girl sometimes fell asleep in class. Catherine straightened, her businesswoman demeanor returning like armor sliding back into place. Which brings me to why I'm here. I have a proposition for you, Mr. Patterson. One that could change everything for you and your daughters. Jim stared at the envelope as if it might explode. Rich people didn't show up in coffee shops offering propositions to broke veterans without wanting something in return. Every instinct, honed by years of hard work and harder lessons, screamed that this was too good to be true. What kind of proposition? Catherine glanced at Sophie and Maya, who were pretending not to listen while straining to catch every word. Perhaps we should discuss this somewhere more private. My office is downtown. Daddy, is the fancy lady going to help us? Sophie's whispered question, delivered with the innocent directness of childhood, nearly broke Jim's heart. The idea that his 8-year-old daughter had to hope for rescue from strangers said everything about how badly he'd failed at the most important job he'd ever had. Jim looked from his girls to Catherine, seeing something in the older woman's eyes that reminded him of his own desperation, though wrapped in expensive clothes and cultivated confidence. Whatever she wanted, whatever this proposition entailed, at least hearing it couldn't hurt. What are you proposing? Catherine's lips curved into a smile that was equal parts mysterious and determined. Something that will sound absolutely insane, Mr. Patterson. But Mr. Patterson, I need to be completely honest with you first. I've been looking for you for 3 years. When I found you 6 weeks ago, I saw more than just the soldier who saved my daughter. She pulled out a thick folder from her briefcase, and Jim's stomach dropped as she opened it on the table. Financial records, medical files, employment history showing 200 rejection letters, each one a small death of hope. And then she showed him the psychiatric evaluation. Subject shows signs of severe depression, isolation behaviors, weight loss, detachment from social connections, high risk for self-harm if current stressors continue to escalate. The clinical language was devastating. Jim's hands shook as he read words describing his mental state from a psychiatrist he'd never met, based on observations by investigators he'd never seen. You did what? You had me. You spied on me like some kind of Jesus Christ lady. He stood up abruptly, the chair scraping loud against the floor. Other patrons looked over now, no longer pretending disinterest. His hands clenched into fists, not in threat but in barely controlled fury at having his privacy violated, his struggles documented like he was some kind of specimen. You had no goddamn right. Daddy! Sophie's frightened voice cut through his anger like a knife. He was scaring his daughters, making a scene, becoming the kind of unstable person that evaluation had described. The realization made him feel sick. Catherine remained calm, her voice steady, but not cold. "You're right. I invaded your privacy. But, Mr. Patterson, I needed to understand the full scope of what you were dealing with. I couldn't fail again like I failed Amanda. I had to know everything." She met his eyes directly. No apology in her gaze, but no condescension either. "I'm a woman who controls things. I gather data. I plan. I execute." That's how I built my company from nothing into what it is today. When I saw you were in crisis, I couldn't just walk away with good intentions. I needed a strategy. Jim sat back down slowly, the fight draining out of him. A strategy. That's what his life had become, a problem to be solved by someone with resources and connections he couldn't imagine. A strategy. That's what this is. I'm a project to you. The bitterness in his voice was impossible to hide. Another rich person thinking they could fix poverty with planning and money treating human beings like business acquisitions. No. You're the father of two beautiful girls who deserve better than what poverty can give them. And I'm a lonely woman who failed her own daughter and wants a second chance. Catherine's voice softened, and for the first time Jim heard genuine vulnerability underneath the executive polish. I'm proposing a transaction where both sides win. She reached into her briefcase again and withdrew an elegant envelope sealed with what looked like real wax. The formality of it seemed absurd in this run-down coffee shop with its cracked linoleum and flickering fluorescent lights. "I have a proposition for you, Mr. Patterson. One that will sound absolutely insane, but I believe it might be the answer both of us have been searching for." 20 minutes later, they sat in the back of Catherine's pristine black Mercedes as it glided through downtown Seattle's gleaming towers. Jim watched his daughters press their faces to the tinted windows, marveling at the city from this new perspective, the view from inside wealth rather than staring up at it from street level. "Where are we going?" His voice sounded rough even to his own ears, abraded by stress and the constant low-grade panic that had become his baseline state. "My office. We need privacy for this conversation. And frankly, Mr. Patterson, you need to see who I am before you can understand what I'm offering." The Sterling Industries building pierced the Seattle skyline like a steel and glass needle, 40 stories of architectural ambition that Jim had driven past 1,000 times during his construction days, never imagining he'd walk through its doors. The marble lobby echoed with the click of expensive shoes, the murmur of important conversations, the hum of money and power moving through the world. The elevator climbed silently to the 38th floor, and Jim's ears popped with the altitude. Sophie and Maya stood perfectly still, overwhelmed into rare silence by the opulence surrounding them. Catherine's corner office offered a panoramic view of Elliott Bay, the Space Needle, the Olympic Mountains in the distance. The space was elegant but not ostentatious, rich wood leather furniture and photographs that told a story of a life lived at the highest levels of business and society. Framed photos showed Catherine with politicians, CEOs, celebrities. Awards and certificates covered one wall. "Daddy, look, she has so many prizes." Maya's whispered observation held a kind of awe that made Jim's chest tight. This was a world so far removed from their cramped apartment that it might as well be another planet. Catherine smiled genuinely for the first time since they'd met, kneeling to Maya's eye level. "Those are for boring, grown-up work, sweetheart. Would you girls like some juice and cookies while your father and I talk?" Her assistant, a kind-faced woman named Mrs. Chen, appeared and settled Sophie and Maya in a nearby conference room with snacks and coloring books. Jim watched through the glass wall as his daughters dove into the activities with an enthusiasm that spoke to how rarely they received such simple treats. Catherine poured 2 cups of coffee from an expensive-looking machine that probably cost more than Jim's monthly rent. "Mr. Patterson, I'm 62 years old. I built this company from nothing after my first husband died young. I've made more money than I could spend in 10 lifetimes." She handed him the coffee, their fingers brushing briefly. The cup was real porcelain, heavy and warm in his hands. I own homes in 6 states, this Seattle estate, a penthouse in Manhattan, a beach house in Miami, a cabin in Aspen, a vineyard property in Napa Valley, and a ranch in Montana. Catherine moved to the window, gazing out at the city sprawling below. But for all my success, I failed at the one thing that mattered most. Jim waited, sensing she needed to tell this story her own way. I was never able to have children of my own. When I married Amanda's father, she became my world. I threw myself into being her mother with the same intensity I brought to business. Catherine's reflection in the window showed an expression of profound regret. But I was too busy building my empire. I worked 80-hour weeks, missed her school plays, her graduations, her basketball games. By the time I realized what I'd lost, she was grown and deployed to Afghanistan. Her voice cracked slightly on the last word. I thought I had forever to make it right, to be the mother she deserved instead of the CEO who happened to live in the same house. Through the glass, Jim watched Maya laugh at something Sophie had drawn, and he understood Catherine's grief on a visceral level. The fear of failing your children, of looking back and realizing you'd been present in body but absent in all the ways that mattered. When she died 3 years ago, I realized all my wealth meant nothing. No family, no legacy except corporate profits and empty houses scattered across America. Catherine turned from the window to face him directly. I've spent the last 3 years searching for purpose. I've donated millions to charity-funded scholarships, built hospitals, but none of it filled the void Amanda left behind. She moved to her desk, picking up a silver-framed photograph of a beautiful young woman in army fatigues, smiling despite the harsh Afghan sun. Then I remembered her final request. Find James Patterson. Take care of him. Jim set down his coffee cup with trembling hands, the expensive porcelain clicking against the mahogany desk. Mrs. Sterling, I appreciate what you're trying to do, but let me finish. Her voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed, but Jim heard the plea underneath it. Whatever she was about to say mattered to her in ways that transcended. Business transcended even the obligation to a dead daughter's wishes. I investigated you thoroughly, Mr. Patterson. I know about your wife's death 4 years ago, about how you've raised those girls alone while battling your own grief. I know about the construction accident that damaged your back and ended your career. I know you've applied for over 200 jobs and been turned down because of your disability. The words hit Jim like physical blows, each one a humiliation laid bare. Having his struggles catalogued so clinically made him feel exposed, vulnerable, stripped of the dignity he'd been clinging to by his fingernails. I also know that despite everything you've endured, you've never once complained or given up. Those girls adore you, and you've somehow kept them happy and hopeful, even while your world was falling apart. Catherine's voice softened, and Jim heard genuine admiration there. That takes a special kind of strength, Mr. Patterson. A kind of strength I never had with Amanda. She moved closer, her blue eyes intense with purpose. I have money, but no family. You have family, but no money. I have houses that echo with emptiness. You have love that could fill any space. Catherine took a deep breath, and Jim's heart started pounding because he could sense the precipice they were approaching, the moment where everything would change or shatter completely. So, here's my proposition, Mr. Patterson. Marry me. I'll legally adopt Sophie and Maya as my daughters. You'll have financial security, excellent medical care for your back, the best schools for the girls. In return, I get to be a grandmother to 2 little girls who need one. I get to help raise Amanda's legacy, the children of the man who saved her life. And maybe if I'm very lucky, I get to discover that there's more than one way to build a family. The silence that followed Catherine's proposal stretched between them like a taut wire. Jim felt as though the air had been sucked from the room, leaving him gasping for breath in the rarefied atmosphere of wealth and impossible offers. You can't be serious. This is crazy as hell. He stood abruptly pacing to the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. Far below, people moved like ants through their daily lives, unaware that 40 stories above them, his entire world was being turned upside down by a proposal that sounded like something from a fever dream. You don't even know me. This isn't how people get married. I know more about you than you might think. Catherine's voice remained calm, measured infuriatingly reasonable, given the magnitude of what she'd just suggested. I know you haven't dated anyone since your wife died because you've been too focused on being both mother and father to your girls. I know you lie awake at night worrying about their future, about whether you're enough. I know you sold your wedding ring last month to pay for Maya's medicine when she had that ear infection. Jim's hand instinctively went to his bare ring finger, the pale band of skin where gold had circled for 8 years before desperation forced him to trade memories for antibiotics. How could you possibly know that? Because I make it my business to understand the people I'm investing in. And make no mistake, Mr. Patterson, this is an investment in you and those girls and in something neither of us has had in a long time. Family. The word hung between them, heavy with possibility and danger. Jim thought of the empty apartment waiting for them, the stack of overdue bills hidden in his bedside drawer, the growing desperation in his daughter's eyes when they thought he wasn't looking. This isn't how people get married. This is a business transaction. Catherine nodded slowly, acknowledging the truth of his words without flinching from them. Yes, it is. At first. But Mr. Patterson, the best partnerships often start with practical foundations. She moved to stand beside him at the window, close enough that he could smell her subtle perfume. Something expensive and understated that probably cost more per ounce than he'd spent on groceries this month. My first marriage began as a merger of 2 prominent San Francisco real estate families. We learned to love each other over 15 years until cancer took him. What we built started as strategy and became something real, something that sustained us both through good times and bad. Jim looked at her reflection in the window, seeing past the polished exterior to the loneliness underneath. She wasn't lying about that, at least. Whatever else this was, Catherine Sterling was a woman who'd lost everything that mattered and was reaching for something, anything, to fill the void. I'm not asking you to love me, Mr. Patterson. I'm not even asking you to sleep with me if that's what you're worried about. Her directness made him flush despite everything. I'm proposing a partnership. Separate bedrooms, at least initially. No physical expectations unless that changes organically over time. We would present as a united front to the world, attend social functions together, be partners in every sense except the romantic one. Unless we discover that partnership can grow into something more. I'm not opposed to that possibility, but I won't demand it, and I won't expect it. From the conference room came the sound of Sophie playing a melody on the piano that Jim hadn't noticed before. Simple notes picked out with the careful concentration of a self-taught child, but beautiful in their sincerity. Your daughter has talent. She's been teaching herself from library books and YouTube videos. We can't afford lessons. The admission tasted like failure, and Jim hated himself for that feeling, because damn it, he was trying, he was doing everything he possibly could, and it still wasn't enough. I studied piano for 12 years. I could teach her properly. Both of them, if Maya's interested. Catherine's offer was casual, but Jim heard the yearning underneath. She wanted this. Wanted to fill her empty houses with children's laughter. Wanted to be needed again. Wanted a second chance at the motherhood she'd fumbled the first time around. And what do you need most? His voice came out rougher than intended, but Catherine didn't flinch. I need to be needed again. I need to hear children's laughter in my house. I need someone to care whether I come home at night. Her voice dropped to barely audible, and Jim had to strain to hear over the sound of Seattle traffic 40 floors below. I need to not die alone in some sterile hospital room with only lawyers and employees around my bedside. The raw honesty of it hit Jim in the chest. This wasn't a CEO making a calculated business move. This was a woman terrified of her own mortality, of reaching the end and realizing that all her success and wealth had bought her nothing but an expensive coffin and a corporate legacy that would be forgotten within a generation. There's something else, something I haven't told you about Amanda's death. Catherine's voice shifted, taking on a weight that made Jim turn away from the window to face her fully. The accident that killed her wasn't random. She was driving to meet me for lunch when a drunk driver ran a red light. She died on the way to the hospital. But before the paramedics arrived, she was conscious for a few minutes. A witness heard her final words. Catherine's composure cracked, revealing the grief she'd been holding back. She said, "Tell Catherine to find James Patterson. Tell her to keep her promise. Tell her that love comes in many forms." The weight of those words settled over Jim like a physical thing. Amanda Morrison, dying on a Seattle street, had been thinking of him, a man she'd known for perhaps an hour 20 years ago, but whose actions had given her the life she was now losing. So you see, this isn't just about what I want or what you need. This is about honoring a dying woman's wish, about creating something meaningful from tragedy. Through the glass wall, Jim watched his daughters building a fort with couch cushions under the watchful eyes of Mrs. Chen. They looked happier than he'd seen them in months, comfortable in this beautiful space with this complex woman who seemed genuinely interested in their well-being. The practical part of his mind, the part that had kept them alive these past 8 months, was already calculating. No more sleepless nights about rent, no more choosing between groceries and electricity, no more watching his daughters pretend they weren't hungry to make him feel better. But the part of him that still grieved Rachel, that wore his wedding ring until desperation forced him to sell it, rebelled against the idea. It felt like betrayal, like giving up on the memory of the woman he'd loved since high school, the woman whose last words had been asking him to take care of their babies no matter what. "I need time to think." "Of course." Catherine's voice held no pressure, no urgency, just patient understanding. "But Mr. Patterson, let me ask you this. What would Rachel want for those girls?" The question hit him like a physical blow because he knew the answer. Rachel would want Sophie and Maya to be safe, happy, loved. She would want them to have every opportunity life could offer. She would sacrifice anything, even his faithfulness to her memory, to ensure their future. "Take care of our babies, Marcus. Whatever it takes." He could almost hear her voice that last conversation in the hospital when they both knew she wasn't coming home. She'd made him promise to live to be happy, to not let grief destroy what remained of their family. "What are your terms?" The words came out before Jim could second-guess them, and he saw relief flash across Catherine's face so quickly he almost missed it. "Let's start with the wedding, and we'll figure out the rest as we go." 3 weeks later, Jim stood in front of the full-length mirror in Catherine's guest bedroom, adjusting his tie for the 3rd time. The simple gray suit she'd insisted on buying him fit perfectly tailored to accommodate the slight stoop his back injury had left him with. Through the window, he could see the garden where they'd decided to hold the small ceremony, just the girls, Mrs. Chen as witness, and a judge Catherine knew personally. A soft knock interrupted his nervous fidgeting. "Come in." He expected Catherine or one of the girls. Instead, his sister Jenny entered, her face a mixture of concern and curiosity. She'd driven up from Portland that morning despite Jim's assurances that she didn't need to come. So this is really happening. She took in the elegant bedroom, the wedding attire, the view of Elliott Bay, through windows that probably cost more than her annual salary as a middle school teacher. Jim nodded, not trusting his voice. The past 3 weeks had been a whirlwind of legal paperwork, gentle integration into Catherine's world, and countless conversations about boundaries, expectations, and how to help the girls adjust. They'd attended family therapy sessions with Dr. Sarah Hicks. Catherine's idea to ensure they were all processing the dramatic changes healthily. Are you sure about this? I mean, I've met Catherine and she seems wonderful, but marriage to someone you barely know. I know her better now. We've spent every evening together these past weeks. She's good with the girls, Jenny, and she's been nothing but honest about what this is and what it isn't. Jim understood his sister's concern. Hell, he'd had the same doubts himself during sleepless nights in the guest bedroom, staring at the ceiling and wondering if he was making the biggest mistake of his life. But what happens when one of you wants something different? What if she falls in love with someone else? What if you do? Then we'll deal with it when it happens. Right now, this is what's best for everyone involved. Jenny stood and hugged him tightly, and Jim breathed in the familiar scent of her lavender shampoo, grounding himself in family and history before stepping into an uncertain future. I just want you to be happy, big brother. You've sacrificed so much already. I'm not sacrificing anything. I'm gaining a partner, financial security, and the chance to give my daughters everything I couldn't provide alone. That's not sacrifice. That's opportunity. 30 minutes later, Jim walked through Catherine's garden toward the small altar they'd set up beneath an arbor of climbing roses. The Seattle autumn had cooperated with a rare sunny day, golden light filtering through the changing leaves. Sophie and Maya walked ahead of him, scattering rose petals and giggling with delight at their important role, their new dresses properly fitted this time, swirling around their legs. Catherine was already waiting stunning in a simple ivory dress that complemented her silver hair. She wore Amanda's pearl necklace, had shown it to Jim earlier, explaining that it felt right to have her daughter's blessing represented somehow. As Jim took his place beside her, Catherine squeezed his hand gently. Her skin was soft, warm, real. No regrets. None. The word came out more confidently than Jim had expected, and he realized with surprise that he meant it. Whatever happened, whatever this marriage became or didn't become, at least he was choosing action over despair, hope over resignation. Judge Morrison, no relation to the Morrison from Jim's construction accident, despite the name coincidence, began the simple ceremony. The words washed over Jim in a blur until they reached the vows they'd written together. James, I promise to be your partner in raising these beautiful girls. I promise to respect the boundaries we've established while remaining open to wherever this journey takes us. I promise to honor Rachel's memory and never try to replace her in your heart or theirs. Catherine's voice stayed steady but warm, and Jim felt his throat tighten at the care she'd taken with those words, the way she'd acknowledged Rachel's place in their lives without resentment or jealousy. Catherine, I promise to be your partner in building the family we both need. I promise to help you heal from losing Amanda by creating something beautiful in her honor. I promise to give this marriage, this partnership, my full commitment and respect. When Judge Morrison pronounced them married, Catherine kissed Jim's cheek gently, a gesture that felt natural rather than awkward. Sophie and Maya cheered and ran to embrace them both, and for a moment, Jim could almost believe they'd always been a family, that this strange arrangement was somehow exactly what all of them had been searching for without knowing it. The wedding night passed quietly, Jim alone in his room down the hall from Catherine's master suite. Through the baby monitor she'd installed, practical not intrusive, she'd explained, he heard her reading bedtime stories to both girls. Their voices mingled in the kind of domestic harmony he'd stopped believing was possible. Sophie's questions about princesses blending with Maya's giggling at funny character voices, Catherine performed with surprising skill. Month 1 felt like walking on eggshells wrapped in silk. Every morning began with formal greetings over coffee, Catherine already dressed in business attire by 6, Jim still adjusting to having someone else in the kitchen before dawn. They circled each other with careful politeness, two strangers learning to share space without colliding. The girls adapted faster. Sophie devoured the books filling her new shelves, came home from Lakeside Academy with stories about microscopes and art studios Jim couldn't have dreamed of providing. Maya spent hours with the golden retrievers Hemingway and Fitzgerald, following her through the house like devoted shadows. But Jim felt the weight of obligation pressing down on his healing spine. Catherine's chef prepared elaborate meals he picked at nervously. The housekeeper hired before their talk about consulting him first cleaned around him like he was furniture. He'd catch glimpses of himself in the hallway mirrors and barely recognize the man staring back dressed in clothes that cost more than his old monthly salary. "Why don't you and Kate kiss like Mommy and Daddy used to?" Sophie's question came 3 weeks in, delivered over breakfast, while Catherine scanned reports on her tablet. Jim's coffee cup froze halfway to his mouth. "Kate and we're a different kind of married kiddo." Catherine glanced up, and something flickered across her face too quickly for Jim to read, understanding disappointment. Relief. "Like roommates who take care of each other." Sophie's 8-year-old logic cut straight to the truth with the kind of clarity only children possessed. "Something like that, yeah." Maya had nightmares that first month. Jim would wake to her crying, fumbling out of his guest room bed to find Catherine already there, sitting on Maya's floor, with the girl curled in her lap. The first time he'd started to apologize for the disruption. Catherine had waved him off, continuing to rock Maya gently while murmuring reassurances. "I'm hungry, Daddy. So hungry." Maya's dream-slurred words made Jim's chest constrict. Even with full refrigerators and pantries overflowing, his daughter's body remembered deprivation played it back in her sleeping mind like a trauma she couldn't escape. The next morning, he found sandwiches in the refrigerator with a note in Catherine's precise handwriting, "For Maya's midnight hunger. There's always food here." K. Such a small gesture. Such a profound understanding of what his daughter needed, not platitudes about safety, but concrete evidence that starvation would never touch her again. Month 2 brought their first real conflict. Sophie came home from Lakeside in tears, her new backpack Kate Spade expensive, chosen carefully clutched against her chest. "They laugh at me. Say we're poor people pretending to be rich." She collapsed into Jim's arms in the kitchen, and fury ignited in his chest like gasoline meeting flame. "She doesn't need this fancy school. Public school was fine." He didn't realize he'd said it loud enough for Catherine to hear until she appeared in the doorway still in her suit from a board meeting. "She needs time to adjust. Running away teaches her to quit when things get hard." Catherine's voice carried that boardroom authority that set Jim's teeth on edge. "I know what's best for education. Trust me on this." "Trust you." Jim stood Sophie still clinging to him, and he felt every protective instinct he possessed roaring to life. "You don't get to decide what's best for my daughter without asking me first. We agreed equal partners, not you telling me what to do." "I'm not telling. I'm advising based on experience. I went to Lakeside. Sophie is brilliant. She'll thrive if you don't baby her." "Baby her, I'm protecting her. There's a difference." His hands clenched into fists at his sides, that familiar rage at his own helplessness mixing toxic with the new anger at Catherine's presumption. "Damn it, Kate, she's 8. She doesn't need character building through bullying." Catherine's expression shifted steel, giving way to something softer. "You're right. I'm sorry. I'm trying to fix this like a business problem instead of listening to what you're saying about your daughter's actual experience." The apology surprised him enough that his anger deflated slightly. "What do you want to do?" They compromised. Sophie stayed at Lakeside, but Jim took her to their old neighborhood park every Saturday, played with kids from their former apartment building, reconnected with the world she'd known before, marble countertops and designer dresses. Catherine learned to step back to ask, instead of direct. That evening, Kate knocked on Jim's door after the girls were asleep. "I overstepped. Old habits die hard when you've spent 40 years running a company where your word is law." She stood in the hallway, backlit by the soft glow from the sconces, looking uncertain in a way Jim had never seen. "Yeah, you did. But thanks for listening when I pushed back." Silence stretched between them, not uncomfortable but weighted with things unsaid. "We're figuring this out, aren't we?" Catherine's question held genuine uncertainty, as if she needed confirmation that they were building something real rather than playing house with legal documents and good intentions. Slowly, but yeah, we are. Month 3 brought unexpected warmth. Catherine teaching Sophie piano every evening, patient corrections delivered with encouragement rather than criticism. Jim helping Kate in the kitchen. She was spectacularly bad at cooking burned water somehow, and their shared laughter when smoke detectors wailed over cremated chicken. Jesus, Kate, how did you survive 62 years without burning your house down? He waved a dish towel at the smoke alarm while Catherine scraped blackened poultry into the garbage disposal. I had people for that. Now I have you. Her smile transformed, her face erased years of executive stress, and Jim felt something shift in his chest. Not love, exactly, not yet, but the recognition that partnership could carry its own kind of intimacy. They attended their first charity gala together, Sterling Industries fundraiser at the Four Seasons. Seattle women in designer gowns and men in tuxedos that cost what Jim used to make in 6 months. Catherine had insisted on buying him a proper tux, sat with him, while the tailor took measurements, her hand resting on his shoulder, in a gesture that felt protective rather than possessive. My husband, James Patterson. She introduced him to a circle of tech CEOs and venture capitalists, and Jim braced for condescension. Instead, a silver-haired woman in Chanel asked what he did. Construction consulting and full-time dad. He waited for judgment, got respectful nods instead. The dad part's harder than running my hedge fund, the woman. Margaret, something managing billions, laughed like she meant it, and Jim felt Kate's hand find his under the table. Supportive. Proud even. Driving home, Kate kicked off her heels with a groan that was almost indecent. Jim glanced over, saw her rubbing her foot against the Mercedes plush carpet. Those things are torture devices masquerading as fashion. Without thinking, he pulled into a scenic overlook, turned in his seat. Let me see. He took her foot in his hands, her stockings silk smooth, her skin warm through the thin fabric, and pressed his thumbs into her arch. Catherine froze, eyes widening. You don't have to. I know. But we're partners. Right. Partners. Help each other. He worked the knots from her instep, while Seattle glittered below them, the Space Needle lit like a beacon. Ferries crossing Puget Sound, trailing wakes of white foam. Catherine's head fell back against the leather seat, her expression somewhere between relief and something more complicated. When he finished, the silence in the car had changed texture. Intimate without being sexual, comfortable in a way that surprised them both. Thank you. Her voice came out quieter than usual, and Jim realized this might be the first time someone had taken care of Catherine Sterling in decades. She'd built an empire on self-sufficiency, forgotten what it felt like to receive rather than provide. Month 4 shattered their careful progress. Jim came home to find a strange woman vacuuming the living room. Who the hell are you, the woman? Mrs. Rodriguez, middle-aged and kind-faced, jumped at his tone. I'm the new housekeeper Mrs. Sterling hired. Ice flooded Jim's veins. He found Catherine in her home office, surrounded by contracts and spreadsheets, reading glasses perched on her nose, making her look professorial. What the hell, Kate? You hired someone without asking me. She looked up, genuinely confused by his anger. I thought you'd be happy. Less work means more time with the girls. I don't need someone else taking care of my responsibilities. I can take care of my own damn house. I'm not some invalid who can't manage basic chores. The humiliation underneath his rage burned hotter than the fury. This was about more than a housekeeper. It was about being useful, about contributing something beyond his presence. It's not about your capabilities. It's about making our lives easier. You're going back to work part-time. I'm traveling more for business. The girls have activities every night. We need help. We need help. You mean you need help because you can't stand anything not being managed and optimized like one of your goddamn acquisitions. Jim heard his voice rising, hated himself for it, but couldn't stop. I was managing just fine before you showed up with your money and your solutions to problems I never asked you to solve. Catherine's face went pale, then flushed with anger that matched his own. Managing just fine, Jim. You were 3 days from eviction when I found you. She stood, and Jim saw her corporate persona sliding into place like armor. Sophie had lost 12 pounds because you were skipping meals to make sure she ate. You were selling Rachel's jewelry to buy antibiotics for Maya. That's not managing, that's drowning and pretending you can swim. Each fact felt like a physical blow. Jim's shame crystallized into something harder, meaner. So this is charity after all. You're keeping me around like some kind of pet project, the grateful veteran you saved from homelessness so you can feel good about yourself. How dare you? Catherine's voice cracked like a whip, and Jim saw tears forming in her eyes for the first time since they'd met. Actual tears from a woman who'd built billion-dollar empires without crying in boardrooms. How dare you reduce what we've built to charity? You think I spent 4 months learning to braid Sophie's hair for charity. You think I stayed up all night when Maya had nightmares because I felt sorry for you. She was crying openly now, mascara tracking down her face, and Jim stood frozen because he'd never seen Catherine lose control like this. You want to know what this is really about? Her voice broke completely. Vulnerability stripped raw and bleeding. I'm terrified, Jim. Terrified that you'll wake up one day and realize you don't need me anymore. That the girls don't need me. That I'm just the rich woman who bought herself a family because she was too pathetic to build one naturally. The confession gutted him. Jim had been so focused on his own fears being a kept man, losing his self-respect, that he'd missed Catherine's terror of abandonment, her certainty that everyone she loved would eventually leave. I hire a housekeeper because I'm scared. Scared that if I can't make everything perfect, you'll take the girls and go. I try to control everything because control is all I know. And when I can't control you, when you push back, I panic because it means you're real. And that means I could lose you. Catherine turned away, tried to retreat into her professional mask, but Jim could see her hands shaking. I should check on the Henderson contract. I have calls to the New York office. He caught her arm gently, stopped her flight. Kate, wait, please. She stood rigid under his touch, not pulling away, but not yielding either. I'm scared too. Every day I wake up in this beautiful house watching you teach my daughters things I never could, seeing how much they adore you. And I wonder when you're going to realize you could have had this with someone who actually deserves it. Some successful businessman from New York or San Francisco who could be your actual equal instead of a charity case you took on out of obligation. Catherine turned her blue eyes searching his face. Is that really what you think this is? I don't know what to think anymore. 4 months ago you were a stranger who offered me a business arrangement. Now you're everything to those girls. You're my best friend, my partner, someone I trust completely. But I still don't understand why you chose me. Why you chose this difficult path when you had so many easier options. Catherine sat down heavily on her leather couch, exhaustion replacing anger. Do you want to know why I really chose you, Jim? He nodded, needing truth more than comfort. When I watched you with your daughters in that coffee shop, I saw something I'd never had and always wanted. Not money, not success, not even love in the romantic sense. I saw a man who would sacrifice everything for his children without hesitation or resentment. I saw the kind of parent I'd always hoped to be but never had the chance to become because I was too busy building empires to build relationships. She looked directly at him. No corporate polish, just raw honesty. I didn't choose you because I felt sorry for you, Jim. I chose you because I admired you, because I wanted to learn from you how to love so completely, so selflessly. And yes, I also wanted to hire a housekeeper because I'm used to delegating and optimizing, but that doesn't mean I think you're inadequate. It means I'm inadequate at remembering that families aren't businesses. Jim felt the knot in his chest loosening, anger draining away into something more complicated. I'm sorry. I was being an ass, letting my pride get in the way of seeing your intentions. You were being human. We both were. Maybe it's about time we had this fight. It means we're not just politely coexisting anymore. We're actually becoming something real. They kept Mrs. Rodriguez, but reduced her to twice weekly. Jim continued managing the household on other days, Catherine learning to ask his opinion before hiring anyone else. Small compromises building toward actual partnership. That night, instead of retreating to separate rooms immediately after the girls' bedtime, they sat in Catherine's study talking until 2 a.m. About Rachel, about Amanda, about the fears that kept them both awake. Catherine confessed her guilt over missing Amanda's childhood, choosing conference calls over school plays. Jim admitted his terror that he was failing Sophie and Maya the way he'd failed Rachel, by not catching her cancer sooner, not pushing harder for treatment. You couldn't have saved her. Cancer doesn't care about determination or love. Catherine's words offered absolution Jim hadn't known he needed. And you didn't fail Amanda. She became an incredible woman who served her country and died knowing you loved her. That's not failure, that's a complicated success. When Jim finally stood to go to bed, Catherine whispered into the darkened study. Good night, Jim, and thank you. For what? For not giving up on me. On us. Month 5 brought discovery and devastation. Jim was searching for Sophie's birth certificate, needed it for some school paperwork, and opened the wrong filing cabinet in Catherine's office. The folder was labeled clearly, Private Investigation. Patterson Family. His hands shook as he opened it, knowing he was violating her privacy, but unable to stop. What he found made his blood turn to ice. Surveillance photographs, dozens of them. Jim and his daughters captured from a distance at the supermarket, the park outside their old apartment building, all taken without their knowledge, documenting their lives like they were subjects in some anthropological study. Interview transcripts with his sister Jenny, her words about Jim's depression and struggle laid out in clinical typeface. Medical records he'd never authorized anyone to access, detailing his pain medication prescriptions with commentary about dependency risks. Then he found the extended psychiatric evaluation, and his vision went red at the edges. Subject shows dependency indicators beyond depression. Monitor for potential addiction risk given prescription pain medication usage. Recommend intervention if Patterson shows signs of substance abuse relapse. A note in Catherine's handwriting ran along the margin. Watch for addiction patterns. Amanda struggled with painkillers after deployment injury. She hadn't just thought he might hurt himself. She'd suspected he was an addict, watched him for signs of drug abuse, like he was a ticking bomb waiting to destroy himself and his daughters. The timeline at the back showed surveillance beginning 6 weeks before their coffee shop meeting. Every moment he'd thought was chance had been choreographed. Catherine had orchestrated their accidental encounter, manipulated him when he was most vulnerable, played him like a violin. Jim sank into Catherine's desk chair, the folder trembling in his grip. Betrayal tasted like copper and ash. Jim, I thought I heard... Catherine's voice cut off as she appeared in the doorway and saw the open file. Her face drained of color. Were you ever going to tell me about this? His voice came out deadly calm, more frightening than shouting. Jim, let me explain. Explain what? That you didn't just investigate my finances. You had me psychologically evaluated like some kind of specimen. You thought I was a goddamn junkie. He stood brandishing pages of surveillance photos and medical assessments. Monitor for addiction risk. Substance abuse relapse. You married me because you thought I was going to kill myself or OD on pills and leave my daughters orphaned. That's not why I married you. Isn't it? Jim's control finally shattered, rage pouring out in a torrent. According to Dr. Williams here, I was showing concerning behavioral patterns consistent with severe depression and potential self-harm. You didn't just want to help, you wanted to fix me, control me like one of your business problems. Catherine stepped into the office, closing the door to keep the girls from hearing. Yes, I was concerned about your mental state. The investigator I hired noticed patterns that worried him. Noticed, you mean spied. Had someone follow me and my daughters, watch us when we didn't know, photograph us like we were criminals. He threw the photos on her desk, images of Maya crying outside their old apartment, Sophie looking too thin at the grocery store, Jim himself slumped on a park bench looking defeated. You talked to my sister without telling me, read my medical records, built a whole profile like I was some acquisition target you needed to understand before making an offer. The embarrassment burned hotter than anger now. She'd seen him at his absolute lowest and documented. It created a permanent record of his failures. Did you laugh when you saw the pathetic veteran who couldn't even keep his family fed? No, Jim. I needed to understand what you were dealing with so I could actually help instead of making things worse. Catherine's voice rose to match his. I couldn't fail again like I failed Amanda. I had to know everything, your financial situation, your mental state, whether you had support systems, whether there were risks I needed to account for. Risks you needed to account for, Jesus Christ. Kate, listen to yourself. I'm not a risk assessment or a business strategy. I'm a human being you violated and manipulated when I was desperate. Jim's voice cracked on the last word. You'd already decided to approach me before you sat down at that table. The whole Afghanistan story, the dramatic timing, all of it calculated. The Amanda story is completely true. Catherine's composure finally broke entirely. Every word I said about her, about what you did, about her final request, all of it happened exactly as I told you. Yes, I planned our meeting instead of leaving it to chance. But that doesn't make Amanda's wishes or my gratitude any less real. But you thought I was an addict. You watched me like I was dangerous. I watched you like someone who'd lost everything and might not survive the fall. Catherine was crying openly now. Makeup smeared, professional mask completely shattered. You want to know the truth? Fine. I was terrified. Terrified that I'd find you too late, that Amanda's dying wish would lead me to your grave instead of a coffee shop. Terrified that I'd approach you wrong and drive you away. Terrified that I'd fail at this the way I failed at everything with my daughter. She grabbed the folder from his hands, ripped pages out. Yes, I had you investigated. Yes, I documented everything. Yes, I made notes about addiction risk because Amanda nearly destroyed herself with painkillers after her injury, and I couldn't bear watching another person I cared about go down that road. You didn't know me. You had no right. I know that. I know I violated your privacy and manipulated you and did a dozen things that were ethically questionable at best. But Jim, look at where we are now. Look at Sophie and Maya. They're thriving. Look at what we've built together. She gestured wildly at the house around them, at the life they'd constructed over 5 months. Tell me this has all been some elaborate psychological manipulation. Tell me I'm still treating you like a business acquisition instead of my partner, my friend, my family. Jim wanted to keep fighting, wanted to cling to his righteous anger, but he couldn't deny the truth of her words. Sophie was flourishing at Lakeside, confident in ways she'd never been before. Maya had stopped having nightmares about hunger, and he himself, he'd gained back the weight he'd lost, stood straighter, despite his injury. Smiled more in the past months than the previous 4 years combined. That doesn't excuse the deception. His voice came out weaker, anger fading into exhaustion. Catherine sat down heavily, surrendering. You're right. I should have told you about the investigation from the beginning. Should have been completely honest about how much I knew and how I found you. She looked up at him, mascara-streaked face showing her age in harsh office lighting. But I needed to know everything. I couldn't fail again like I failed Amanda. I thought if I controlled every variable, gathered every piece of data, I could prevent disaster. That's how I run my business, and I tried to run this the same way without realizing that families aren't businesses and people aren't projects. I'm not a business acquisition, Kate, and the girls aren't a project you can manage with spreadsheets and surveillance. You're right. I don't know how to do this, how to trust, how to let go. I only know how to control and fix. And I can't fix this, can I? I've destroyed what we built because I couldn't stop being afraid. She looked so broken, so genuinely devastated, that Jim felt his anger crack. This wasn't malicious manipulation. This was a woman so damaged by loss that she'd tried to control the uncontrollable, plan for the unplannable, protect against every possible pain by gathering enough information to prevent it. "Daddy, Kate, why are you yelling?" Sophie's voice from outside the door made them both freeze. Jim opened it to find both girls in their pajamas, tears streaming down their faces. "Are you getting divorced already?" Sophie's question hit like a fist to the solar plexus. Maya clutched her stuffed elephant. "I like it here, Daddy. I like Kate. Please don't leave." Jim knelt down, pulled them both into his arms. "No, sweethearts. Kate and I just had a disagreement. Adults do that sometimes even when they care about each other." "But you were so mad." Sophie's observation stung because she was right. He'd been furious in ways the girls had probably heard through walls and closed doors. Catherine stepped forward, her ruined makeup and red eyes impossible to hide. "We were. But we're going to work it out because that's what families do. They fight sometimes, but they don't give up on each other." She looked at Jim, making it a question rather than a statement. "Aren't we?" He wanted to say yes immediately, wanted to reassure his daughters that their new stability wouldn't crumble. But the betrayal still burned, and he needed time to process what he'd learned. "Yeah, we'll work it out." The words came out less certain than the girls needed, and he saw fear flicker across their faces. That night, Jim moved his things to the guest room, couldn't sleep in a space that felt contaminated by deception. Sophie came to find him around midnight, crawled onto the couch where he lay staring at the ceiling. "Daddy, are you okay?" "I will be, baby. I promise. I love Kate. She's nice to us. She teaches me piano and helps Maya with her drawings and makes funny voices when she reads stories." Sophie snuggled against his chest and Jim felt his heart breaking. "Please don't make us leave. I know this house is fancy and everything's different, but I like having Kate as my—" She stopped, uncertain what word to use. "As your what, sweetheart?" "I was going to say Mom, but that feels wrong because of Mommy Rachel. But Kate feels like a mom too, just different. Can you have two moms if one of them is in heaven?" Jim held his daughter tighter. Tears he'd been holding back finally spilling over. "Yeah, baby. I think you can. And I'm not going to make us leave. Kate and I just need to work through some grown-up stuff, but we're not giving up." After Sophie went back to bed, Jim pulled out his phone and stared at Jenny's number. It was 1 a.m, but she answered on the second ring. "Jim, what's wrong? Did Kate call you before we met? I mean, did she contact you?" Silence on the other end confirmed what he'd read in those transcripts. "Yeah, about 6 weeks before you told me about the marriage proposal. She asked about you, how you were doing, what the girls liked, how Rachel used to comfort them when they were upset." Jenny's voice carried guilt. "I thought she was a social worker or something. She was so professional, so concerned. I'm sorry, I should have told you. It's not your fault. She's very good at getting what she wants. Jim, whatever you found out, whatever she did, that woman loves those girls. And whether you want to admit it or not, she loves you too." "How can you know that?" "Because at the end of our conversation, she asked me one thing that had nothing to do with her investigation." Jenny's voice softened. "She asked, Does Jim ever smile anymore? I want to make him smile again. That's not a question someone asks when you're just a project or an obligation. After they hung up, Jim sat in the darkness thinking about smiles, about the way Catherine's whole face transformed when she laughed, about how she'd learned to make terrible jokes just to get the girls giggling, about how she'd researched Sophie's favorite books and Maya's fear of thunderstorms and made the house feel safe in ways that had nothing to do with money. He pulled out his phone again, typed a message to Catherine. Amanda's grave. Tomorrow, 2 p.m. We need to talk. Her reply came 3 hours later, suggesting she'd been awake and miserable. I'll be there. Lakeview Cemetery spread across Capitol Hill like a park for the dead old growth trees, casting shadows over graves dating back to Seattle's founding. Rain fell in that gentle Seattle way, more mist than drops, turning the grass emerald and making headstones gleam like polished river stones. Amanda's grave lay beneath a maple tree, the marker simple granite with her name dates and a line from Rumi that Catherine had chosen. Let the beauty we love be what we do. Fresh flowers already sat in the holder, Catherine's weekly ritual, Jim realized. An American flag marked her service, the fabric limp in the damp air. Catherine stood under a black umbrella, no makeup. Eyes swollen from crying or sleeplessness or both. She looked every one of her 62 years without the armor of professional polish, and Jim felt something crack in his chest at how vulnerable she appeared. He approached slowly, his own umbrella dripping, and stood beside her in silence. They stared at the grave for long minutes, the only sound rain pattering on nylon and distant traffic on the arterial below. I should have asked before, but what was Amanda like? Really like, beyond the stories you've told the girls? Catherine seemed surprised by the question, but understood its importance. Stubborn as hell. Like me in that way once she decided something moving her was like trying to redirect a river with your bare hands. A sad smile touched her lips. But she was gentle in ways I never learned to be. Could diffuse any argument with humor, make everyone in a room feel heard and valued, even when they disagreed with her. I used to watch her at family dinners, the way she'd draw out shy cousins or deflect tension between feuding relatives, and wonder where she'd learned that grace, because it certainly didn't come from me. Jim heard genuine admiration mixed with regret in Catherine's voice. Tell me about the promise she asked you to make. Word for word, if you can remember. Catherine closed her eyes, living it again. We were at lunch, one of those rare times when we'd actually carved out space in both our schedules. She ordered this ridiculous salad with 17 ingredients because she was trying to eat healthier after her last deployment physical. We were laughing about something stupid, I can't even remember what, and then she got serious. Looked at me across the table and said, Mom, if anything happens to me, find James Patterson, the soldier who pulled me out of that burning vehicle. Make sure he's okay. Make sure his family is taken care of. Promise me. Catherine's voice broke on the last words. I promised without thinking much about it. Thought she was being dramatic, morbid, maybe working through combat trauma in her own way. Never imagined 3 months later I'd be standing over her grave trying to figure out how to keep that promise. Jim turned to face her for the first time since arriving. Kate, I need to ask you something. And I need you to be completely honest, even if the answer hurts. She nodded, bracing herself. If Amanda had never asked you to make that promise, would you still have sought me out after reading that psychological evaluation? Catherine considered the question carefully, didn't rush to give him the answer he might want. I don't know. I'd like to think I would have, because anyone with resources to help should help when they see someone in danger. But honestly, Jim, there are thousands of people in crisis every day. I can't save them all, and I don't try. Amanda's request gave me permission to focus on you specifically, made it feel like destiny instead of charity. Her honesty cut, but Jim appreciated it more than comfortable lies. So it was suicide prevention mixed with honoring your daughter and maybe some genuine attraction to the kind of father I am. and a dozen other complicated motivations that all got tangled together until I couldn't separate obligation from desire, gratitude from loneliness, Amanda's wishes from my own needs. Catherine's voice steadied. Does it matter which reason came first? Does it change what we've built together over these months? Jim looked at the grave again, thinking about the young woman he'd known for perhaps an hour 2 decades ago. She'd had a whole life after that day: marriage, family, career, love lost, joy. All of it gifted by a split-second decision he'd made without thinking. You know what I think Amanda would say about all this if she could hear us standing over her grave arguing about motivations and investigations and who saved whom? Catherine shook her head. I think she'd tell us to stop overthinking it and focus on what matters. The girls are happy and thriving. We've become a real family despite how it started. We care about each other even when we're furious. Everything else is just details we're using to avoid admitting we're both terrified of losing this. Catherine's eyes brightened with hope that she tried to contain. Jim, are you saying... I'm saying I've been an idiot, so focused on why you chose me that I forgot to appreciate what we chose together after you found me. He reached for her hand, found it cold in the November air despite her gloves. Kate, I don't care anymore whether you married me out of pity, obligation, or genuine attraction. What I care about is that we've made it work. We've created something beautiful from circumstances that could have been purely transactional, could have been just another rich person assuaging their guilt with checkbook charity. But it's not that. It stopped being that somewhere between month 1 and month 5. Catherine's grip tightened on his fingers. So you forgive me for the deception, for investigating you and manipulating our first meeting. I forgive you for caring enough to make sure you understood what you were getting into, for being thorough in ways that felt violating, but came from not wanting to fail again. Jim took a breath, committed to complete honesty. But Kate, no more secrets. If we're going to make this work long-term, we need complete transparency even when it's uncomfortable. Even when telling the truth means admitting you're scared or wrong or don't know what you're doing. Agreed. Complete honesty from now on, even when it makes me look less than perfectly in control. They stood in silence, rain increasing slightly, both of them getting damp despite the umbrellas. The cemetery felt peaceful rather than morbid, a place for reflection instead of mourning. Jim, there's something else I need to tell you. Something I've been afraid to admit even to myself, because saying it out loud makes it real, and real things can hurt you. Catherine's voice dropped to barely audible. I'm falling in love with you. Not with the idea of you or the family we've created or the way you've helped me heal from losing Amanda. I'm falling in love with you. Your strength that doesn't need to prove itself. Your kindness that extends even when people don't deserve it. The way you make me laugh when I'm taking myself too seriously. She looked at him directly, tears mixing with rain on her face. It terrifies me because I didn't expect it. Thought this would stay practical, a partnership built on mutual need that might someday become deep friendship. But somewhere between burnt chicken and piano lessons and fighting about housekeepers, I fell in love. And I don't know how to navigate romantic feelings at my age, don't know the rules anymore. Jim felt warmth spreading through his chest, despite the cold rain, a loosening of something he hadn't realized he'd been holding tight. Kate, I've been falling in love with you too. Fighting it because it felt like betraying Rachel, like I was supposed to spend the rest of my life faithful to a ghost. But loving you doesn't erase what I had with her. It just means my heart's bigger than I thought, has room for both past and present. He stepped closer, their umbrellas touching. I just didn't know how to reconcile those feelings with our practical arrangement, didn't want to pressure you into something you'd agreed wasn't part of the deal. So, what happens now? Catherine's question held wonder and fear in equal measure. Jim glanced at Amanda's grave one more time, silently asking permission from a woman he barely knew, but owed everything to. Then he leaned down and kissed Catherine, gentle and tentative, rain cold on their faces, and their lips warm against each other. When they pulled apart, Catherine smiled through tears. Amanda would approve. She always said love comes in many forms, that the best relationships built slowly from respect rather than exploding in passion that burned out fast. Then let's go home to our daughters and stop pretending this is anything other than a real marriage between two people who chose each other fully and honestly. On the drive back, Jim reached across the Mercedes center console and took Catherine's hand. She laced her fingers through his, and they rode in comfortable silence, broken only when Jim asked a question that had been bothering him. "Move into my room tonight, or I'll move into yours, whichever feels right." Catherine glanced over, surprised. "Are you sure you're ready for that?" "Yeah, we've wasted enough time being scared of what this could become. Time to actually live it instead of circling around it." "Okay. But fair warning, I snore sometimes when I'm really tired." Jim laughed, the sound surprising him with its genuine joy. "I don't care if you snore like a chainsaw. We're doing this for real now." Months 6 and 7 transformed their careful partnership into something organic and alive. Jim moved into Catherine's bedroom, and those first nights felt awkward, two adults who'd both been married before now learning each other's sleep patterns and morning routines. Catherine was an early riser, always up before dawn. Jim needed coffee before coherent conversation. They negotiated space and habits with the same careful attention they'd brought to parenting decisions. Physical intimacy developed, gradually built on trust rather than urgency. The first time they made love 3 weeks after the cemetery reconciliation felt less like passion and more like coming home, gentle, unhurried, two people learning the geography of each other's bodies and scars and needs. Afterwards, Catherine traced the surgical scars on Jim's lower back where they'd fused his vertebrae. "Does it still hurt?" "Sometimes. Less now than before, better medical care, physical therapy, not stressing about money every second." He kissed her shoulder, tasted expensive moisturizer and sweat. "You..." Catherine understood the question, pulled his hand to a scar below her ribs. "Appendectomy when I was 40. Emergency surgery in the middle of closing the Bellevue deal. I refused anesthesia until I'd signed the contracts." Jim laughed against her skin. "That's the most you thing I've ever heard." "I was an idiot. Nearly died of sepsis because I couldn't let go of control, even when my body was literally poisoning itself." She rolled to face him in the darkness. "You've taught me that letting go doesn't mean losing control. It means trusting someone else to carry part of the weight." Their life settled into rhythms that felt earned rather than imposed. Sunday mornings, Jim made pancakes while Catherine attempted to help and usually made a mess. Sophie practiced guitar. She'd switched from piano at her own request, and Catherine had swallowed her disappointment and bought a beautiful Martin acoustic. Maya painted at the kitchen table, the dogs underfoot, hoping for dropped food, the house filled with the comfortable chaos of family. Catherine learned to ask before making decisions, to consult rather than direct. Jim learned to accept help without feeling diminished, to recognize that partnership meant letting someone care for you as much as you cared for them. But month 8 nearly destroyed everything they'd built. Catherine had been working longer hours, taking calls with the New York office at midnight, flying to Los Angeles for board meetings and returning exhausted. Jim noticed but didn't press, trusted her to manage her own workload. Until Mrs. Chen called him at 2 in the afternoon, panic shredding her normally calm voice. "Mr. Patterson, you need to come to the office now. Mrs. Sterling collapsed during a board meeting. The ambulance is already here." Jim's world tilted sickeningly. He called Mrs. Rodriguez to watch the girls, drove downtown with his heart trying to escape his chest, parked illegally, and ran into the Sterling Industries building like death itself was chasing him. Swedish Medical Center's emergency room smelled like disinfectant and fear. Jim burst through the doors, wild-eyed and terrified. "Catherine Sterling, where is she?" The nurse checked her computer. "Are you family? I'm her husband." Pride and terror mixed in those words, spoken with absolute certainty for the first time, without hesitation or qualification. They led him to a curtained bay, where Catherine lay pale against white sheets 4 in her arm monitor, beeping her heartbeat like a metronome counting down his worst fears. Kate, her eyes opened, found him filled with tears. "I'm sorry. The girls, Sophie and Maya, they need. The girls are fine. Mrs. Rodriguez has them." Jim took her hand, careful of the IV line. "You scared the hell out of me." Dr. Martinez appeared a no-nonsense woman in her 50s with kind eyes that had seen too much. "Mrs. Sterling, your blood pressure is dangerously high. Your cortisol levels indicate chronic stress, and you've got a stress-related heart arrhythmia that could have killed you if you'd pushed it much further." Catherine tried to sit up. "I'm fine. I just overworked a little." "Mrs. Sterling, this isn't a little overwork. If you don't make dramatic changes immediately, the next time I see you might be the morgue instead of the ER." Dr. Martinez pulled up charts on her tablet. "I'm prescribing 3 months complete rest. No work, no email, no phone calls. Medication for your blood pressure and heart rhythm. Weekly therapy to address your stress management, which is clearly non-existent." "I can't take 3 months off. The company needs me. The Henderson deal is closing." "No." Jim's voice came out harder than he'd ever used with her. Catherine's eyes widened. "What?" "No, Kate. You're taking the 3 months. Doctor's orders, and I'm backing her 100%. Catherine tried to protest, but Jim cut her off. "The company doesn't need you dead. The girls need you alive. I need you alive. The board can handle the Henderson deal, or they're not worth the obscene salaries you pay them." He leaned closer, voice dropping, but intensity increasing. "If you step away, the world will keep spinning. Sterling Industries will survive without you for 90 days, but Sophie and Maya can't survive losing another mother, and I can't survive losing you, not when we just figured out what we have." His hand framed her face thumb, brushing her cheekbone. "So you're taking the damn sabbatical, and I don't want to hear another word about it. For once in your life, let someone else be in charge while you rest." Catherine stared at him, and Jim watched her process the role reversal, him giving orders, her being forced to surrender control. Then her expression crumpled with relief so profound it was almost painful to witness. "Okay, you're right. I'll take the leave." "Okay," Jim repeated, it shocked by her immediate capitulation. "Okay. I trust you to make this decision for us because you're right. I've been running myself into the ground thinking if I just work harder, plan, better control, more variables, I can prevent loss. But you can't control life or death or love, can you? You can only choose to live fully in whatever time you have." She started crying, but they were tears of exhaustion and relief rather than grief. "I'm so tired, Jim. I've been tired for so long, decades of trying to prove I was indispensable, that my value came from what I produced rather than who I was. I don't know how to just be without doing." Jim climbed into the hospital bed beside her, careful of wires and tubes, and held her while she cried. "Then I'll teach you. The same way you taught me it was okay to need help. We'll figure it out together." The 3 months of Catherine's sabbatical transformed their family in ways Jim hadn't anticipated. Without work to escape into, Catherine had to confront her control issues directly. She struggled those first weeks, phantom phone always in her hand, before Jim gently removed it, redirected her toward actual presence. They established new routines. Catherine drove Sophie to guitar lessons every Tuesday, actually stayed to watch instead of working in the parking lot. Friday afternoons, she took Maya to the Seattle Art Museum, let their daughter explain paintings with the earnest confidence of an 8-year-old art critic. Saturday mornings, all 4 of them volunteered at the food bank where Jim had once stood in line, Catherine's idea, her way of remembering where they'd come from. "I missed this with Amanda. The ordinary moments that build relationships brick by brick." Catherine washed dishes beside Jim one evening, an activity she'd never done before having staff. I was always chasing the next deal, the next acquisition, thinking I'd have time later for the important things. Then later never came, and she was deployed and grown and gone. Jim bumped her hip with his. You're not missing it now. That's what matters, learning from past mistakes instead of repeating them. In month 9, Jim's construction consulting business finally took off. Henderson Construction hired him not through Catherine's connections, but because his reputation for safety protocols had spread through Seattle's tight-knit building community. Then another firm, and another, until he was working 20 hours a week at rates that made him dizzy. His first real paycheck from his own business made him cry. Catherine found him at his home desk staring at the direct deposit notification, tears streaming. What's wrong? Nothing's wrong. Everything's right. I earned this. Me, my knowledge, my skills, my reputation. Not your money, not your connections. Mine. She understood immediately why that mattered, knelt beside his chair. I'm proud of you. So damn proud of what you've built from nothing but expertise and determination. We saved each other, didn't we? I needed financial stability, and you needed to remember that people matter more than profits. We each gave the other what was missing. Catherine kissed him sweet and deep. Best business deal I ever made. Year 2 arrived with the confidence of a relationship that had survived testing. Sophie turned 10 with a birthday party that mixed her lakeside friends with kids from their old neighborhood. Catherine's insistence wanting Sophie to stay connected to both worlds. The guitar recital she gave left parents whispering about Juilliard, but Sophie just grinned and said she wanted to write songs, not perform classics. Maya's art covered the refrigerator, the hallway, Catherine's office. One piece showed their family 4 people, 2 dogs, 1 cat named Pixel that Maya had begged for until they caved. In the painting, everyone was holding hands in a circle, smiling with that uninhibited joy only children's art captured. Can we get a puppy? Maya's question came during Sunday pancakes, her timing calculated for maximum family presence. We have 2 dogs already. Jim flipped a pancake, caught Catherine's amused expression. But we need a puppy. Sophie wants one too. Sophie looked up from her guitar, nodding enthusiastically. A golden retriever puppy to keep Hemingway and Fitzgerald company when they get old. Catherine laughed, that free, uninhibited sound that still surprised Jim with its warmth. I'll think about it. Jim groaned. Oh no. That means yes. You're terrible at saying no to them. Catherine's smile turned mischievous. I learned from the best. You're not exactly strict when Maya asks for art supplies or Sophie wants another guitar book. She was right. Jim had discovered that after years of having to say no to everything, being able to say yes felt like healing. Their second anniversary dinner at Canlis Restaurant overlooking Lake Union felt different from the wedding. No nervousness, no uncertainty, just comfortable celebration of what they'd built. Catherine wore a black dress that Jim had helped her pick. She'd learned to ask his opinion on things, value his taste, even in areas where she'd once been rigidly independent. I have something for you. Catherine slid a small velvet box across the table. Jim opened it to find his wedding ring. Rachel's ring, the one he'd pawned for Maya's antibiotics. How did you... I tracked down the pawn shop 6 months ago. Bought it back and had it cleaned. I wanted to return it on our anniversary. Jim's hands trembled, holding the simple gold band. Kate, you didn't have to do this. Rachel gave you this family, Sophie and Maya. I wanted to honor her by giving you back what you sacrificed. She was part of our story, will always be. This seemed right. Jim slipped the ring onto his right hand, not his left wedding finger, but close enough. Thank you. This means more than you know. His turn. He pulled out an envelope, handed it across the table. Catherine opened it, found readoption papers, making her legal mother to Sophie and Maya in a renewal of their original agreement. I want us to sign together this time. as real partners who chose this freely instead of out of desperation. Catherine's eyes filled, and she pulled out a pen from her purse, always prepared, his CEO wife who'd learned to balance boardroom instincts with family needs. They signed at the table, their server witnessing, with confused delight, not understanding the significance, but moved by their obvious emotion. To Kate Sterling Patterson, the woman who saved my life by letting me save hers. Jim raised his wine glass. To Jim, the man who taught me that control isn't strength, trust is. That the best things in life can't be managed or planned, only lived. They clinked glasses, kissed across the table, and Jim marveled at how far they'd traveled from that desperate coffee shop meeting to this moment of genuine love earned through struggle and choice. The following week, they took all 4 members of their family plus dogs because Maya insisted to Amanda's grave. Sophie had written a poem about families that choose each other, practiced reading it aloud until she could get through without crying. A family isn't just blood and name. It's people who choose to love the same, who hold each other through the night, who make the ordinary moments bright. The simple words captured something profound, and Jim saw Catherine wiping tears as Sophie's clear voice rang through the cemetery. Maya asked the question that had been building in her 8-year-old mind. Is Amanda our sister in heaven? Catherine knelt down to Maya's level, taking both her hands. Yes, sweetheart. She is. She wanted you to have the best life possible, and she sent your daddy to me to make that happen. Jim spoke to the grave, to the woman he barely remembered, but owed everything. I hope we made you proud. Your mom's incredible, bossy as hell sometimes. Catherine elbowed him gently. But she loves these girls like you would have loved your own children. She learned how to let go of control and trust that love is enough. Catherine added her own words. Thank you, baby girl, for your final gift to me. For giving me a second chance at motherhood, at love, at building something real instead of just profitable. I miss you every day, but I'm grateful every day too. They stood together at the grave, family forged from tragedy and choice, and Jim felt the circle complete. From Afghanistan to a coffee shop to this moment, everything had led here to love that grew slowly and honestly instead of exploding in passion and burning out. Their final scene arrived on an ordinary Sunday morning that felt extraordinary in its simple perfection. The kitchen smelled like coffee and pancakes, Jim flipping them, while Sophie played an original composition from the living room. Maya sat at the table painting their family again, endlessly, each version adding some new detail she'd noticed. Catherine helped Maya mix colors, their heads bent together in concentration, and Jim paused to watch them. His wife and daughter, paint smudged on both their hands, laughing about something he couldn't hear over Sophie's guitar. Hemingway and Fitzgerald dozed by the back door, and Pixel the cat sat on top of the refrigerator like a furry judge overseeing the chaos below. Through the window, Seattle spread out gray and wet and beautiful, the Space Needle barely visible through low clouds. The guitar music stopped, and Sophie came to the kitchen doorway. Dad, Kate, come look at this. I finished the song I've been working on. They gathered in the living room, sticky with syrup, paint-stained happy, and listened to Sophie play a melody she'd written herself. The notes spoke of loss and hope, of families torn apart and rebuilt, different but whole. When she finished, they applauded, and Sophie bowed with theatrical flair. Jim's phone rang, Jenny calling from Portland. Hey, big brother, can you guys host Thanksgiving this year? You've got the biggest house, and you're actually a decent cook, unlike the rest of us. Catherine, overheard, nodded enthusiastically before Jim could even ask. Of course. Tell everyone to come. We'd love to have the whole family. After he hung up, Maya seized the opportunity. Can we please get a puppy before Thanksgiving? Please, please, please. Sophie joined in. We need a puppy. We have room, and we'll take care of it, and... Jim looked at Catherine, saw her trying to maintain serious parental authority and failing completely. I'll think about it. He groaned dramatically. Oh no. That means yes. You're terrible at saying no to them. We're going to end up with a whole pack of dogs. Catherine laughed that full-body joy that still made his heart skip. I learned from the best. Besides, you're the one who let Maya adopt Pixel after she asked exactly twice. She was right, and Jim couldn't deny it. After years of deprivation, being able to say yes to his daughters felt like the greatest luxury money could buy. Maya showed them her latest painting, their family portrait, with 4 people, 2 dogs, 1 cat, and now a golden retriever puppy added hopefully in the corner. See, the puppy belongs with us. It's already in the picture. Jim and Catherine exchanged looks, silently communicating in the way long married couples develop. Maybe we can look at puppies next weekend. Catherine gave in first, and both girls shrieked with delight, hugging her so hard they nearly knocked her over. Jim pulled Catherine close, kissed her temple while their daughters celebrated. Thank you. For what? For teaching me that love isn't about control. It's about trust, about letting go and holding on at the same time, about being brave enough to build instead of protect. Catherine turned in his arms, kissed him properly, while Sophie made exaggerated gagging noises and Maya giggled. Thank you for giving us everything we needed, including you. Through the window, rain-cleared sunshine breaking through Seattle's perpetual clouds. Inside, warmth and laughter and the beautiful chaos of family chosen earned real. Maya tugged on Jim's sleeve. Daddy, are we rich now? Like really rich. Jim looked around at his wife, his daughters, the dogs sprawled across expensive furniture, the cat judging them from above, paint and music and half-burned pancakes and unconditional love filling every corner of the house. Yeah, baby, we're the richest people I know. Because wealth wasn't measured in bank accounts or properties across 6 states. It was measured in moments like this, ordinary Sunday mornings, transformed into everything that mattered. It was measured in second chances and chosen families in learning to trust after loss and loving again, after thinking your heart was too damaged to risk it. Jim had walked into that coffee shop 2 years ago with nothing but daughters he couldn't feed and pride that couldn't keep them warm. Catherine had walked in with everything money could buy and nothing that mattered. Together they'd built something neither could have created alone, a family born from necessity, that had become inevitable, a partnership that had deepened into love. So gradually neither could pinpoint when exactly it happened. Sometimes the best things in life couldn't be planned or managed or controlled. Sometimes you just had to be brave enough to say yes when a stranger offered you something that sounded insane. Sometimes you had to trust that love came in many forms, that families could be built from unlikely materials, that heroes existed in coffee shops counting change and boardrooms surrendering control. 2 years ago, Jim Patterson had been drowning. Today, he was swimming with strong strokes toward a future he'd never imagined but couldn't imagine living without. And beside him swam Catherine Sterling Patterson, formerly a woman who controlled billion-dollar empires but couldn't control her own loneliness. Now a woman who'd learned that the best investment she'd ever made wasn't in real estate or stock portfolios, but in love partnership and the courage to build a family from nothing but need and hope and the willingness to try. The puppy they'd inevitably adopt would make 5, but who was counting? In this house, there was always room for more love.